Aloha champions, and welcome to this special social studies video for Tuesday, November 24th. For today, as we are about to embark on a 3-day holiday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, there is no school for the Thanksgiving break. I thought it would be important for us to take a little bit of time to understand the history of Thanksgiving. So for today, I'm going to be reading out this passage from history.com all about the history of Thanksgiving here in the United States. So without further ado, let's begin. Thanksgiving Day is a national holiday in the United States, and Thanksgiving 2020 occurs on Thursday, November 26th. In 1621, the Plymouth colonists and Wampanoag Native Americans shared an autumn harvest feast that is acknowledged today as one of the first Thanksgiving celebrations in the colonies. For more than 2 centuries, days of Thanksgiving were celebrated by individual colonies and states. It wasn't until 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, that President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a National Thanksgiving Day to be held each November. Starting back at the earliest, Thanksgiving at Plymouth. In September 1620, a small ship called the Mayflower left Plymouth, England, carrying 102 passengers, an assortment of religious separatists seeking a new home where they could freely practice their faith, and other individuals lured by the promise of prosperity and land ownership in the New World. After a treacherous and uncomfortable crossing that lasted 66 days, they dropped anchor near the tip of Cape Cod, far north of their intended destination at the mouth of the Hudson River. 1 month later, the Mayflower crossed Massachusetts Bay, where the Pilgrims, as they are now more commonly known, began the work to establish a village of Plymouth. Fun fact, did you know that lobster, seal, and swans were on the Pilgrims menu for that first Thanksgiving? Not common food items that we think of today. Usually we think of turkey or ham, but here they had lobster, seal, and swans as some of their food for this meal. Throughout that first brutal winter, most of the colonists remained on board the ship, the Mayflower, where they suffered from exposure, scurvy, and outbreaks of contagious disease. Only half of the Mayflower's original passengers and crew lived to see their first New England spring. In March, the remaining settlers moved ashore, where they received an astonishing visit from an Abenaki Native American who greeted them in English. Several days later, he returned with another Native American, Squanto, a member of the Pawtuxet tribe who had been kidnapped by an English sea captain and sold into slavery before escaping to London and returning to his homeland on an exploratory expedition. Squanto taught the Pilgrims, weakened homeland Squanto taught the Pilgrims, weakened by malnutrition and illness, how to cultivate corn, how to extract sap from maple trees, and how to catch fish in the rivers and avoid the poisonous plants. He also helped the settlers forge an alliance with the Wampanoag, a local tribe, which would endure for more than 50 years and tragically remains one of the sole examples of harmony between European colonists and Native Americans. In November of 1621, after the Pilgrims' first corn harvest proved successful, Governor William Bradford organized a celebratory feast and invited a group of the fledgling colony's Native American allies, including the Wampanoag chief Massasoit, now remembered as America's first Thanksgiving, although the Pilgrims themselves may not have used that term at the time. The festival lasted for 3 days. While no record exists of the first Thanksgiving's exact menu, much of what we know about what happened at the first Thanksgiving comes from Pilgrim columnar Edward Winslow, who wrote, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a special manner rejoice together. After we had gathered the fruits of our labors, they 4 in one day killed as much fowl as with as little help beside served the company almost a week, at which time amongst other recreations we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest their greatest king Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed upon our governor, and upon the captain and others. And although it be not always so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty." Historians have suggested that many of the dishes were likely prepared using traditional Native American spices and their cooking methods. Because the Pilgrims had no oven and the Mayflower sugar supply had dwindled by the fall of 1621, the meal probably didn't feature pies, cakes, or any other desserts, which have become a hallmark of contemporary celebrations. Okay, so that's the earliest or first Thanksgiving, where we have the Pilgrims of Plymouth, or those who survived the crossing, celebrating with some of their Native American allies. Now, as we've read in some of our books this year, America's history with Native Americans hasn't always been pleasant. Almost never. So as we learn about this, just keep this in mind that 1621, nowhere near the same as the 1860s or so, when we have the long walk of the Navajo that we read about in Sing Down the Moon. But it isn't until 1863 that Thanksgiving becomes a national holiday. Pilgrims held their second Thanksgiving celebration in 1623 to mark the end of a long drought that had threatened the year's harvest and prompted Governor Bradford to call for a religious feast. Days of fasting and Thanksgiving on an annual or occasional basis became common practice in other New England settlements as well. During the American Revolution, the Continental Congress designated 1 or more days of Thanksgiving a year, and in 1789, George Washington issued the first Thanksgiving proclamation by the national government of the United States. In it, he called upon Americans to express their gratitude for the happy conclusion of the country's War of Independence and successful ratification of the U.S. Constitution. His successors, John Adams and James Madison, also designated days of thanks during their presidencies. So the presidents proclaimed, "Let's give thanks for this occasion." In 1817, New York became the first of several states to officially adopt an annual Thanksgiving holiday. Each celebrated it on a different day, however, and the American South remained largely unfamiliar with the tradition. In 1827, the noted magazine editor and prolific writer Sarah Josepha Hale, author, among countless other things, of the nursery rhyme Mary Had a Little Lamb, she launched a campaign to establish Thanksgiving as a national holiday. For 36 years, she published numerous editorials and sent scores of letters to governors, senators, presidents, and any other politician she had the address for, earning her the nickname the Mother of Thanksgiving. So Mary Had a Little Lamb, the same person who wrote that song, also is part of the reason why we celebrate Thanksgiving today. Abraham Lincoln finally heeded her request in 1863 at the height of the Civil War in a proclamation entreating all Americans to ask God to commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife, and to heal the wounds of the nation. He scheduled Thanksgiving for the final Thursday in November, and it was celebrated on that day every year until 1939, when FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, moved the holiday up a week in an attempt to spur retail sales during the Great Depression. You know, that day after Thanksgiving when everybody goes out and shopping, Black Friday. Well, when we were in Great Depression and not everybody had a lot of money, he tried to move it up ahead so that there was more time before Christmas so that families could spend more money during that time. Roosevelt's plan, known decisively as Franksgiving, was met with passionate opposition, and in 1941 the president reluctantly signed a bill making Thanksgiving forevermore the fourth Thursday in November, which means it changes dates. It's not a set date. It can be as early as the 22nd or as late as the 29th, I believe. But it has to be the fourth Thursday in November. Okay? So that's the history, how we went from the Pilgrims of the Mayflower celebrating their first Thanksgiving to how it became a holiday. Now let's look at some of those traditions and rituals that families have adopted over time in regards to Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving traditions and rituals. In many American households, the Thanksgiving celebration has lost most of its original religious significance. Instead, it now centers on cooking and sharing a bountiful meal with family and friends. Turkey, a Thanksgiving staple so ubiquitous that it has become all but synonymous with the holiday, many people calling it Turkey Day, may or may not have been on offer when the Pilgrims hosted the inaugural feast back in 1621. Today, however, nearly 90% of Americans eat the bird. We eat turkey. We either roast it, bake it, or deep fry it, and on Thanksgiving, according to the National Turkey Federation. Other traditional foods include stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Volunteering is also a common Thanksgiving Day activity, and communities often hold food drives and host free dinners for those less fortunate. Parades have also become an integral part of the holiday in cities and towns across the United States. Presented by Macy's department store since 1924, New York City's Thanksgiving Day Parade is the largest and most famous, attracting some 2 to 3 million spectators along its 2.5-mile route and drawing an enormous television audience. I think this year it's only television audience or something weird. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and gathering 2.5 to 3 million people to watch a parade is probably not the healthiest or smartest choice to prevent that. The parade typically features marching bands, performers, elaborate floats conveying various celebrities, and giant balloons shaped like cartoon characters. Beginning in the mid-20th century and perhaps even earlier, the President of the United States has pardoned 1 or 2 Thanksgiving turkeys each year, sparing the birds from slaughter and sending them to a farm for retirement. A number of U.S. governors also perform the annual turkey pardoning ritual. So those are some different traditions and rituals that we have associated with this holiday. But this holiday is not free from controversy, with people disagreeing about one thing or another about this holiday. For some scholars, the jury is still out on whether the feast at Plymouth really constituted the first Thanksgiving in the United States. Indeed, historians have recorded other ceremonies of thanks among European settlers in North America that predate the Pilgrims' celebration. In 1565, for instance, the Spanish explorer Pedro Menendez de Aviel invited members of the local Timuco tribe to a dinner in St. Augustine, Florida, after holding a mass to thank God for his crew's safe arrival. On December 4th, 1619, when 38 British settlers reached a site known as Berkeley 100 on the banks of Virginia's James River, they read the proclamation designating the date as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. Some Native Americans and many others take issue with how the Thanksgiving story is presented to the American public, and especially to school children. In their view, the traditional narrative paints a deceptively sunny portrait of relations between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people, masking the long and bloody history of conflict between Native Americans and European settlers that resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Native Americans over time. And since 1970, there have been protesters who have gathered on the day designated as Thanksgiving at the top of Coles Hill, which overlooks Plymouth Rock, to commemorate a national day of mourning. Similar events are held in other parts of the country. So even though it may be festive for some people don't think it's the right respect for the Native Americans who were not treated fairly throughout America's history. Okay? But Thanksgiving in America is not the only holiday like this. There's other holidays with more ancient origins. Although the American concept of Thanksgiving developed in the colonies of New England, its roots can be traced back to the other side of the Atlantic. Both the separatists who came over on the Mayflower and the Puritans who arrived soon after brought with them a tradition of providential holidays, days of fasting during difficult or pivotal moments, and days of feasting and celebration to thank God in times of plenty. As an annual celebration of the harvest and its bounty, moreover, Thanksgiving falls under a category of festivals that spans multiple cultures, continents, and millennia. Even in ancient times, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they feasted and paid tribute to their gods after the fall harvest. Thanksgiving also bears a resemblance to the ancient Jewish harvest festival of Sukkot. Finally, historians have noted that Native Americans had a rich tradition of commemorating the fall harvest with feasting and merrymaking long before Europeans even set foot on their shores. And with that will bring us to this end of the history of Thanksgiving. So hopefully you've learned something new about this holiday that we're about to celebrate. And as you've watched this video, hopefully you were taking it down ideas to help you answer 5 to 10 questions on our Google form for this afternoon activity on Tuesday, November 24th. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful holiday break, and I will see you all on Monday. Stay awesome.